The demonstrable excellence of homeschool students, Idaho lawmakers trying to get around the education committee with health and wellness sexuality education, and Madison, Wisconsin, the epicenter of silliness on college campuses, and a little bit of Tom Jones. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week we cover those stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses across the nation and the globe. Greetings to all of our faithful listeners, and if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to our podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode. We've got some important stories to cover today, and so with Katie here as my wing person, we're going to get started. Our first story of the day is an interesting one. It's from the New York Times. The New York Times apparently is waging a closet jihad on Christian schools. I've said this before, Katie, and I want to reemphasize it again today. The next big thing coming in terms of education reform, progressive education reform, is an attempt to marginalize, vilify, and ultimately curtail, if not remove, Christian education. And this is a classic example. We have a New York Times reporter by the name of Dan Levin, who has been sending around emails to young people who attend Christian schools, trying to get the dirt. And if we need look no further than the hashtag to know that this is not some friendly association, right? This is hashtag expose Christian schools, right? So New York Times is planning a hit piece, evidently, on Christian schools, hashtag expose Christian schools. Dan Levin, the reporter, who covers American youth for the New York Times, has been asking kids, people, quote, are you in your 20s or younger, who went to a Christian school? I'd like to hear about your experience and its impact for your life. He's obviously trolling for kids who are fed up with the dangerously narrow curriculum, the homophobia of Christianity, the sexism, the anti-abortion stance in Catholic schools. So we're fishing for this. I can only wait to read the expose.
Yeah, so the thing is, he put this out on Twitter, and if you put anything out on Twitter, you're asking to be trolled. So a lot of the responses that were to this exact tweet were positive, saying, I loved my Christian school experience. I learned so much. I learned how to become a man, and this is coming from a man, not from a woman. So they were really positive experiences, but at the same time, it far outweighed the number of likes and retweets he got was the number of comments. And with the whole thing called ratio, that's what's important. People clearly were like, we know what your intent is, Mr. Levin.
He outed himself. He really did. This was ham-fisted even by New York Times. We could have sent an email saying, hey, tell me why your Christian school sucks.com, posted a website on that. Wouldn't have been more ham-fisted than this. But we know this. Doing a little research on this fella, we see some of his bias towards liberal progressive causes. One particular tweet that he put out one day was about how Homeschool Legal Defense Association, right? The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, one of the great organizations promoting and defending homeschool rights and advocacy. He sees this apparently as a dangerous kook group. So now to be looking out for the rights of mom and dad to homeschool their kids is a kooky conspiracy theory. And this is the guy we think is going to write a fair-minded view of Christian schools today.
And it's not like this was one of those instances where you went and tried to dig up dirt on him from a long, long time ago. This was 4 days before he actually put this actual question out. And one of the things that's so interesting is that original tweet was deleted. Mm-hmm. And in place of it, he put up a new quote, and he said, I write about American youth, and the hashtag expose Christian schools, which I didn't create, went viral in recent days. I'm writing about the response to it and want to hear about all experiences, including positive stories, impact about your time in school. So now he's trying to cover his tracks, and he's gotten a lot of response again from this one, and so we'll see what happens in the end.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic example of social media blowing up in your face. We want to watch this story because I'm telling you, Mom and Dad, we're seeing whether it's the Covington Catholic Christian story or what's going on in the Texas legislature. More on that perhaps next week. What's happening with attacks and affronts and assumptions about Christian schools. This is the next front in the progressive war on taking down Christianity.
Yeah, and top of that, because Donald Trump tweeted out about Bible literacy, and maybe it's time we actually have a little bit more of that. The hounds are out, and they're going to be really emphasizing how to take down Christianity in schools as much as possible.
Well, and you see the template that they're planning here, right? Christianity, by definition, the traditional Orthodox Christianity, biblical Christianity, is all about traditional marriage, is a huge advocate for traditional marriage. It is all about the rights of children to be educated in a godly way. It's about the Ten Commandments. It's about the Sermon on the Mount. It is a rejection of our bodily materialist culture. Sex education for kids in Christian schools needs and must be about modesty and humility and restraint, not about excess and radical forms of birth control. It has got to be anti-abortion. And so when we think about all of the things that come with Christian education, the problem I have, Katie, is that a lot of our Christian schools are already fighting this fight against Christian schools for people like Dan Levin. You've got the Christian schools have begun to sell out, that aren't, and the fact that in Covington Catholic school, that the first impulse of the bishop was to rip these kids a new one. Not only did he initially not stand by him, he actually wrote a nasty letter blaming these kids for being racist, only later that he'd have to retract that letter and write an apology. But it's always easier for Christian administrators to condemn Christian kids than it is to immediately seek to defend them in the first place.
Yeah, it's true. All right, so last week was actually a great week across the nation. It was the National School Choice Week, January 20th to 26th this year. And so I just wanted to highlight a little bit of some of the stories that were out there and some of the facts about the National School Choice Week. So back in 2011, there were only 18 states plus DC that had school choice in play. That impacted about 212,000 students. Now there are 29 states that participated, plus DC and Puerto Rico, and that's more than 482,000 students who were impacted by this. And so it was all across the nation. People were showing, kind of their pride for the fact that they were able to, in support of school choice. Now, we talked about in 2011, if you remember back then, education savings accounts got opened. And basically that means there are state funds for every student, and that money follows that student. So that if you decide, as a parent that you want your kid to go to a different school, maybe a private school, you want to do online learning or special ed, they get a certain amount of money for that. And there are 5 states that currently have these states accounts. That's Arizona, Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, and North Carolina. But what's really cool is this year it's looking like they could almost double that by certain states that are considering it, and that's Texas, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Indiana. So it's going to be interesting to see as we move forward, what's going to happen with school choice and these tuition accounts.
Yeah, this is the one area that I think Betsy DeVos does deserve praise. Betsy DeVos, Trump's education secretary, is a big advocate of student choice. I wish she would choose to get us out of Common Core, which she said is dead. I wish she would choose to roll back the Obama administration regulations and changes to Title IX much more vociferously than she has, but you take what you can get. She is a big school choice advocate. My big problem with this is when they are state educational accounts. Ultimately, then the states control them. That the states that are setting aside of money, setting aside this pot of money, making this money tax deductible, dispersing this money to moms and dads when the time comes. We've seen time and time again across the country, states are now forcing schools, charter schools, private schools, that take any state or federal money to conform to state paradigms. I like the idea of parents being able to save some of their tax money for their kids. I don't like the fact that the state education departments are in control of it. The fact is that it is undeniably true that if you're taking state or federal money, the states are more and more coming around to the idea that you have to toe our party line. We'll give you this, we'll allow you to have this perk, but you got to teach our sexuality to your kids. You've got to make sure your kids take our bogus Common Core related tests. You got to make sure that your kids are doing what we say with regards to global warming and environmentalism in science classes. So to me, I don't want the co-opt. I don't want, this is what I love about homeschooling, it's what I love about the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. We should be able to educate our kids at home without any kowtowing or any obligation to the state and to the federal entities. We have to be able to do that. It's a great idea, but it makes me nervous.
Well, and that's why I wanted to point out, since it was National School Choice Week, one of those options we want to remind parents is to homeschool. And we found some statistics out there. The National Center for Education Statistics found that from 1999 to 2012, the percentage of students who actually were homeschooled or are homeschooled has doubled. It went from 1.7% to 3.4%. But if you're looking even at data from the National Home Education Research, they're claiming it's even higher than that. It's maybe 25%. The homeschooling education has grown, and we can see why that has happened.
Yeah, and I've hit the homeschool conventions for the last 3 or 4 years really hard. I can see the enthusiasm. I can see the parents that are turning out in greater and greater droves. One more statistic for you. In the state of North Carolina, 8% of all North Carolina school kids are homeschooled. And as you know, and you're going to show a little chart for us, this argument that homeschool kids are somehow socially retarded or somehow mentally behind or very narrowly educated is absolute BS and rubbish.
Well, yeah, there's what are the standard arguments? Number one, well, homeschool kids are all the religious kids, but they're finding that that's just about 16% of the student population is homeschooled because of religious reasons. 34% are reporting that they're concerned about the school environment with the bullying, the safety drugs, negative peer pressure, and they're just citing an overall dissatisfaction with their academic instruction. And then so the question is, well, homeschool kids, they don't get a good education. They're definitely not smarter. Well, that's not true either, because we're finding the ACT scores for our students who are homeschooled far exceeds any of the public school kids.
Yeah, if you look at those two top lines, one is private schooling, and I'm pretty much willing to guarantee non-Common Core-based private schooling and homeschooling both radically outpaced.
Exactly.
Radically outpaced.
Yeah, if you take a look at it, you can see that the homeschooling and the private schooling, it goes back to 2001, and this data is 2014. I'm interested to see as more data comes out for the following years.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's take a look now at New Mexico, where there is a bill out there that would force colleges to believe accusers in sexual assault proceedings. So New Mexico is considering legislation that would alter the state's sex ed curriculum. It's House Bill 133. It's sponsored by Representative Elizabeth Thompson. In the bill, it says public schools and public post-secondary educational institutions have to adopt policies and procedures addressing affirmative consent in prevention of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So there's actually two parts to this. The first part with the public schools, they were looking at the New Mexico Youth Risk and Resilience Survey, which we've talked about these types of surveys before, and they found that in New Mexico high school students, 8% report that they were physically forced to have sex, and 9.9% reported some sort of sexual violence at least once in the past year. So Thompson says, with all of the conversation around sexual assault, we need to ensure that our young people have the resources they need to make the best decisions for themselves and their bodies. This is a health issue, and we have a responsibility to teach consent as the basis for any sexual activity so we can work together to prevent sexual assault. Only yes means yes.
This is why you don't want states responsible for any aspect of homeschooling. They're going to this radical liberal Democrat from Albuquerque, Democrat Liz Thompson, is deciding now that our public schools, and we will mandate that our college campuses, regardless of what the Constitution says about due process and all of that, give them the story on this.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the sugar-coated version. People will be like, yes, okay, K-12, we're going to agree with this. But what they put in about college campuses is where it really comes to bear. So the Foundation for Individual Rights, FIRE, as we've talked about many times, Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, they claim that HB 133 functionally bans this impartiality in sexual misconduct proceedings. Now, what will happen is that institutions of higher ed who receive financial assistance from the state, so any of the public universities, must adopt detailed, complainant-centered policies and procedures for the investigation of and disciplinary procedures addressing allegations of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and harassment or stalking involving a student, faculty member, employee, contractor, or regent, both on and off campus. So what does that all mean?
And what that means is, first of all, complaint-centered means we are going to not be neutral in our approach to this. And you had mentioned most public schools that take money. Almost every single private school, almost every single private and even Christian college in these states in New Mexico is getting some state money. So what you're going to require even private schools to do is adopt a complaint-centered policy and procedure for the investigation of these kinds of sexual issues. And what that means is you are going to privilege the complainer. You're going to assume guilt until innocent is proven. And you're going to adopt the steps that we've seen argued at the federal level, where boys aren't allowed to defend themselves. Boys aren't allowed to confront their accusers. Boys aren't allowed to hire lawyers. Boys aren't allowed to see the evidence against them, right? Or to have any sense of what the full charge is when they're being interviewed about this. This is what this means, complaint-centered policies. It's a dangerous game, friendo, and FIRE is exactly right about this, that this is an end run around the U.S. Constitution on issues of sexuality for progressives. For progressives, in your public schools, that means from kindergarten, little boy hugs his teacher We've had a situation like that. A little boy hugs his teacher. She files a sexual harassment claim against the little boy. In a situation like that, that little boy is guilty and there's nothing that can be done even if he hires a battery of lawyers. You can't turn this kind of power over to the state that supersedes the Constitution. You can't. It's a dangerous slope. We're already halfway down that slope and the mud's getting thicker, but this would be a good place to fight.
Yeah, and it goes to show how important it is for all of us to read legislation, not just go by what they call it or read maybe the first line or the summary of it, but actually look into this legislation, because at all levels of government, this is what they do. They throw things in there that shouldn't be in there, or they basically hide it in there and hope that you never look at it.
Yeah, and I want to tell you about something else Fire pointed out. It's really an interesting statement from Title. Quote, because Title IX, in pulling this apart, Fire wrote, because Title IX requires institutional impartiality during investigations and adjudications of campus sexual misconduct, any statutory language requiring institutions to adopt policies that might tend to favor the complainant must violate federal statutes. And what I love about this is the hypocrisy of it. Fire is exactly right. According to Title IX, federal Title IX, you can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. You can't prioritize the complainant or the defendant. And yet, it is under Title IX that colleges and universities are already arguing that they have the right to deny due process to children, to college kids. That because of this, Fire is right. We have clearly written in Title IX, you can't discriminate. But politicians and academics and university officials are using Title IX to discriminate, ignoring what it evidently obviously says.
I just don't get it.
It's not just important, Katie, that we read legislation. How about we read the law? Right? The law says, as bad as Title IX is, it spells out clearly that you can't discriminate this way. Yet everybody who's pushing for these kinds of discriminatory policies on college campuses are invoking Title IX when they do it.
'Tis true. All right. Well, we are going to come home to Wisconsin, where a university is hosting an LGBT discovery camp for young teens. So this has actually been happening since 2013 at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. They've hosted this Pride Discovery Camp. It's a summer program for 13 to 17-year-olds, and it's by the UWM LGBT Resource Center. Now, the camp is meant for LGBT plus high school students to embrace their multiple identities and gain a better understanding of marginalized identities through community building, activism, self-expression, and connections in the LGBT plus communities.
So I'm just thinking about all these TV shows, sitcoms, 16 movies that come out where kids go to camp. And dear Penthouse Forum, I have to tell you what happened in band camp when I shared a tent with a fellow boy from my community. Those are all the transgressive stories. Now you're setting up a camp primarily for this. I mean, doesn't it just invalidate the entire spontaneity of this now? Now you're bringing people together. You're having them sleep in tents, evidently. You're having them quote unquote camp. Isn't this whole thing going to be? Isn't it just going to take away the rite of passage that we see?
I'm not thinking it's camping. I'm thinking it's more like glamping.
I'm sure.
I'm thinking they're glamping.
I'm sure they're in a nice air-conditioned university dorm doing this.
Exactly.
Although that doesn't make it perhaps any less risque. And this is the thing. Now you're having the Boy Scouts have more or less been told you can't be Boy Scouts, right? Boy Scouts are actively recruiting women after opening their the originally Christian heritage of the Boy Scouts to homosexuality, and now the Girl Scouts are mad at the Boy Scouts because many of the Boy Scouts are bringing in girls that the Girl Scouts used to be able to recruit from themselves, and so now we're getting rid of all that, and we're just going to replace it all. Maybe you get your merit badge now. We'll replace it all with, instead of camping, where you sat by fires and toasted marshmallows, right, and little weenies, right? Now you've got these transgender and LGBTQ camps. Maybe you get your merit badge in what? In
social justice,
transvestism, or what could be some of the merit badges here that you make here?
There'll be a drag queen show,
right?
So there'll be
a drag queen show. There are a lot of different merit badges you could get in these types.
True.
How many different genders can you identify? A different badge for every gender you identify as. This is the and instead of Eagle Scouts, what we call them? Pelican Scouts?
Pelicans?
We'll call them Pelican Scouts. No. Flamingo. Pink Flamingo Scouts is what we're going to call this organization. You can get your merit badge in the Pink Flamingo Scouts.
This is true. Other programs that the LGBT plus community, the center does, includes the Coming Out Monologues, the annual drag show, and the Lavender Graduation, which I had to look up because I had no clue, but apparently at UWM they have a Lavender Graduation, so not only your achievement of graduating is celebrated, but the fact that you survived your college education.
Yeah, and you know what's so wrong about this? We kind of teased about it with the Boy Scouts. Can you imagine the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee hosting a camp for heterosexual kids to come and celebrate their heterosexuality? Can you imagine them bringing Christian kids to campus, Christian heterosexual kids to campus to be able to celebrate these things?
Wasn't that Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts?
Yeah, it used to be.
I think that's what I...
It used to be. And so you're using all of these public money resources now to create special opportunities for kids who only identify a certain way. And that sort of trickles into the next story, doesn't it? We've got a story about kids becoming activists at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
We have UW-Madison, which they're going to start paying students to advance their social justice issues. For the spring semester, Madison's looking to hire 3 social justice interns, and they are calling all students, that's what it says, all students, undergraduate and graduate, who are passionate about advancing social justice issues such as racial justice, access to education, access to clean food, air and water, criminal justice and prison reform, LGBTQ+ rights, women's rights, voting rights, economic justice, immigrant justice, and or civic engagement. So if you are any one of those things, they want to hire you, and they will pay you $10.50 an hour, and this is negotiable, for 3 to 12 hours a week during the spring semester.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? If you're going to take these kids into the University of Wisconsin-Madison and you're going to start, as they did about a couple of years ago, to take the boys and teach them toxic masculinity, tell the little boys, the young men when they get to college campuses, they're toxic, when you're going to start pushing all of these how many times has University of Wisconsin-Madison been in our story sheet here for goofy stuff like this? And now it makes perfect sense. It's not enough just to drill and to indoctrinate them along this way. Now you're going to pay them less than minimum wage, it looks like.
Well, no, $10.50.
$10.50, that's not
more
bad.
than I make.
You can negotiate.
You can negotiate.
You can negotiate. If you're bona fides, if you're social justice bona fides, if you identify with 6 of those things, maybe they'll pay you a little bit more. But the real question becomes the question of this, right? So it's not enough to have your entire campus and your entire classroom and your dorm life completely turned over to social justice. Now you're going to start paying kids to actively go out and process and push this on college campuses. It seems to me like what you have here is a weaponization. This is a radical weaponization of progressive politics now. It's not enough to teach them. It's not enough to make it part of the curriculum. It's not enough to hire in a very diverse way. You actually have to, in the classroom, and then pay students outside of class time to push this agenda. It is a radical weaponizing of radical progressive politics. Everything on this list is a dream wish for the socialist utopians. And now you got kids being forced to learn it, not being able to challenge it, and now being paid to advocate for it even beyond the classroom time.
Yeah, and this is actually being through the student union. So it's basically where all the kids hang out. That's where these 3 people will be targeting fellow students. And the qualifications include having a strong interest and commitment to creating a more just society. Well, I'm qualified to do that, I guess. I have a strong interest in connecting student organizations, individuals, campus departments around shared interest in social justice work. You should have some background knowledge with social justice issues, but they also include that boring stuff like, hey, you have to be able to work on a computer and use, Microsoft Word. So hopefully they can find 3 students.
And my question is, what business is it of the university to advocate this way, to take kids' own tuition money and dole some of it back to select kids whose worldview perfectly matches their own? That strikes me as at best a conflict of interest. At worst, something much, much, much more dangerous here. And at what point do you start charging kids tuition fees based on their commitment to social justice, or giving them waivers from having to take certain courses or spend certain monies when depending upon their worldview? If kids can demonstrate a greater commitment to social justice, do they get advanced grades? Do they have, or are they able to opt out of required courses in the curriculum that they don't want to take? This is a really stupid idea, but it just demonstrates, again, the degree to which what we've said before is true, that the primary thing that goes on a college campus, particularly a campus like University of Wisconsin-Madison, is not educating your kids neutrally to go out and become career-minded, money-making, family-protecting, satisfied in their vocation people. This is about transforming them into the kinds of people who enter the workforce and enter the family life that they think they should be. And this isn't an education, by the way. This is purely opinion. All of this is utterly 100% political-based and opinion-based. There's no evidence that people who share these interests are better people, are going to impact the environment better. There's no evidence that by drilling this into your kids in the classroom and in their personal life, that you're going to make the country any more fair or efficient or economic or diverse. All this is just social justice posturing. It's political.
Yeah, and they're already looking ahead to next year that based on initial successes, which we don't know what that means, they may be able to continue working there as interns.
And that's the thing. At some point, the interns become a program. And at some point, that program is going to become a minor, where without having to take actual classroom time, you can just simply minor in spreading social justice problems. And then at some point, it becomes a major. And then at some point, every major has to put forth a certain number of their majors every year to become part of this. That's how these things grow.
That's probably what's going to happen. We have another story right on the UW-Madison campus where there's a course this spring that is called Teaching About Trump. Basically, it's supposed to be the American presidency course that's normally taught every spring, every fall, every spring. And it's being taught by Kenneth Mayer, who appears to be primarily focused on President Donald Trump. And State Rep Dave Murphy, who's the chairman of the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities, basically came out and said that Mayer's course syllabus is a politically polarized characterization. Now, if you look at the syllabus, which is available, the course description begins with, "There is no such thing as a bad time to study the American presidency, but sometimes, now for instance, are better than others. We are 2 years into the most, how shall we put it, unconventional presidency in American history, with a president who gleefully flouts the norms of governing and presidential behavior that have structured the office since George Washington." And so the fact that he's got this syllabus out there, it appears he's going to be a little biased. We don't know really how it's going to go. We can hope for the best.
Well, good on you, Dave Murphy. Dave Murphy is one of the good ones. I've worked with Dave, and Dave is a good person, a good Republican to have in charge of the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities. I'm really glad he's calling attention to this because what bothers me about this is, as a professor myself, I believe in free speech. I mean, I would be a hypocrite to argue that professors aren't free to structure courses the way they want. And you can quibble with his glib overview, but he has the right. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing. He has the right to be able to do this. I guess what I would argue is, where is the commitment? And as I hope Dave takes this up with them. If you're going to have classes like this, where's the balance? If you're going to have classes like this, then if we're going to allow you at the universities, because you're taking our state money, right? It's our money that you're appropriating to teach kids these things. If you're going to do this, and you're going to allow your professors, in the name of the Wisconsin ideal, right, to have these kinds of radical views, these glib, dismissive opinions, to pepper their syllabus with all sorts of things that aren't factually based, that are opinions. If you're going to allow them the right to do that, don't you have an obligation, University of Wisconsin, to represent with our public money people doing the same thing on others? So can you imagine if some professor, and if I were a history professor, I'd love to do it, a course on Obama? You want to talk about unorthodox? You want to talk about not upholding the traditions of the presidency that went back to George Washington? Barack Obama did all sorts of things that somebody who's conservatively minded or even economically responsible would be mocking left and right. And so while I agree with Dave, the answer is not, and I don't think Dave would do this, the answer is not to try to shut down the ability of these professors to have these views or to even be that glib about it. It's, where is the intellectual balance? It's our money, right? Which means conservatives pay as much, or given that there are more conservatives in this state than people who identify as radical progressives, conservatives are paying more money into the system for no representation of their views. And that ought to be the idea here. How do we use the power of the purse to guarantee the only kind of diversity that matters on a college campus, intellectual diversity? It's the one form of diversity that liberal educrats have no use for.
Yeah, and what's interesting for me, because my own personal experience with Kenneth Mayer, I've read several of his books during grad school, and what I liked about his stuff is, at least it all comes down to how it was presented in the classroom. And I'm hoping that this professor actually presents the material from his books, because they're reading one of his newest books this semester in that presidency course, as long as you provide both sides and let the kids make up their mind.
But Dave Murphy is right. The fact that he has saw fit to pepper his syllabus with all of these dismissive comments about Trump, all of this gloating, all of this highly dubious bit of suggestion about what the presidency is and what it's become, tells you that if you're getting a document like that on the first day, we have a legitimate right to be worried that what happens in the classroom won't be balanced. And he's making every effort to signal wink, wink. He even writes wink, wink in the syllabus, right? Basically. That we're going to take a look at this. We're not going to take an honest look at this. We're going to take a polemicized look at this. And that's what bothers me, and I think that's what Dave is bothered by too.
Yeah, and just one more thing that he puts in the syllabus, Mayor says, we will leave space in the schedule in case the report from Special Counsel Robert Mueller is released sometime in the semester. I have shortened the reading list because we will undoubtedly spend a lot of time on current events, applying the accumulated knowledge of the presidency literature to contemporary events.
So in other words, it's not really a history of the presidency course. It's a course that we're going to use as a pretense to go after this Trump policy or that Trump policy, this report from the Congress or the Republicans, or this defense of Trump, or this attack on Trump by the Democrat caucus. What this becomes is an opportunity for me to, at any point in the semester, halt what we're doing and weigh in on current political debates. And obviously, we know which side he's going to weigh down on, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, anytime I taught, my main goal, not my main goal, but one of my big goals by the end of the semester was for some students to think I was a conservative and some students to think I was a liberal because they couldn't tell what I was, because I present both sides of everything and let them choose.
I've told this story before real quick. I was teaching at a small university a small college outside of Philadelphia, and I once had a 1,000 students, very small, once had a creative writing, God help us, professor come up to me. So, Dr. Pesta, I understand that from my students that you teach both sides of issues in your classrooms. I thought he was trying to compliment me. I'm like, oh, yeah, somebody here gets it. Somebody here gets it. He looks at me, don't you understand that our kids are so racist and sexist that we must only teach the liberal view, the progressive view? And bear in mind that 95% of the kids at this small school came from Philadelphia, one of the bluest cities in the entire country. And they were too racist and sexist to have to hear any opinion but the progressive one.
All right, well, now it's time to go to an interview Dr. Duke did with a state legislator about the end run Idaho is doing to get sex education into public schools under the guise of health and wellness.
It is my pleasure now to talk to Barbara Ehart, a state legislator from the great state of Idaho. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you know what? Thank you so much for having me. What a unique opportunity. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And look, we've got an important story here. I think that every mom, every dad, every public school parent across the country needs to hear. So you are a member of the state of Idaho's Education Committee. You are the highest resource for the state control of education as a committee in your state house. And so what is happening is the health and wellness people, rather than coming to you or working with you, they took grants starting in the Obama administration to radicalize sexuality teaching in the state of Idaho. And because they were working this through with Washington, they started doing all of this and bringing this into the schools. They sent agents of the state into the schools to ask teachers, to ask superintendents, hey, can we talk to your kids about sex? And the teachers and the superintendents all said, fine. None of this came anywhere near your committee. They, as you said, did an end run around you so they can get really radical forms of sex ed into the schools without your knowledge. And let me ask you this question. At what age does this start? What age are they starting to get the radical sex in Idaho schools now? Not on your watch, but through the health and wellness program.
What we've been able to discover up to this point is it's essentially in the high schools. But, you know, through the libraries, some of the books of which I think you're going to reference later on are all the way down until elementaries. But the actual teaching that we've been able to find to this point it's in the high schools. And yes, the health and welfare department, they were able, to, at least to us, to justify that which they're doing, because since they were getting the federal grants, they assumed they were not accountable to our state statutes, and that's what they had shared with us, and that's certainly not the case.
And that is what exactly has to be foregrounded. I've got two things to point out here. One, what you just said is powerful, that because the federal government of the United States gave grants to the health and wellness program in your state, that they felt that they were entitled to completely supersede educational statutes in the state of Idaho. This is how the federal government, without forcing anybody to do anything, manages to take over control. This is exactly what they do. They undercut not just local school boards, not just local moms and dads, but the Idaho State Education Committee. Second thing, you mentioned that as far as you know, this is only being taught now in high school. That means, as far as you know, high school teachers, public high school teachers, are only teaching certain aspects of this. But as you just pointed out, the agents they send in from health and wellness, I guarantee you they are talking to younger and younger students, and there's no record of that. If it's not in the teacher's lesson plan, if it's not part of the school, there's no way you would know it. But when when they send these agents in, they could have a whole radical agenda they're teaching to middle school kids, and you would never know it because the teachers didn't formally teach it as part of their curriculum. Is that fair to say?
Oh, not only is it fair to say, a mutual friend of mine who had fought Common Core, she knew kind of how this worked. So her daughter had wanted to take, she was interested in nursing, and she is a senior. And so she went in, this friend had gone into the school to look at the curriculum before she signed her daughter up. She looked at the entire curriculum and felt very comfortable with it. You know, that when it comes to actual sex physiology and anatomy, this was completely fine for her daughter to engage in as part of the curriculum. But when her daughter was coming back and saying, you know, Mom, I'm not comfortable in here. And there was no way for her to have known about this because it was a guest educator, a health educator that was coming in. So you're absolutely right. And not only this mom, any of us. And so we're trying to pin this down now. And, you know, if I may say, Duke, the interesting thing that I share with people is here we are, you know, you look at moms and dads throughout Idaho, or throughout the nation for that matter of fact. They're working full time, they get off work, they take their kids, they run them to their after school activities, they're engaging with them in homework, and then they try to spend an hour or two to help fight these very things that are going on. But you look at the other side, you look at the Department of Health and Welfare, you look at the federal level, you look at Planned Parenthood, Human Rights Commission. These people have full-time jobs. They have many massive employees in which they're engaged in this, and they're constantly bringing things of which we find out after they've been enlisted and the programs are ongoing. And then we end up trying to fight it with part-time legislators, with part-time parents, because they're doing the best they can. We are certainly at a disadvantage, and it's why programs like this are huge in helping to get the word out. Absolutely huge, because this is not an easy battle.
Yeah, this is the bait and switch, isn't it? That there's one set of standards that parents can look at on the State of Idaho website, and everybody thinks everything's honky-dory. But what the kids are actually getting, and very oftentimes the homework, the handouts, the sheets, the computer programs they're looking at to facilitate this radical teaching in the middle and even the elementary schools, none of that ever comes home with the kids, so you get a chance to see it. Let's go to some of this stuff. There's a very famous book. We've been talking about this book for 7 years, but now you found it in Idaho schools for particularly younger kids. It's called Perfectly Normal. It's Perfectly Normal. Changing Bodies, Growing Up, Sex, and Sexual Health. Even the title of that book, if they were just to see that, doesn't strike you as particularly dangerous or radical, but when you click to the next image we have here, just one image I'm showing the moms and dads right now has a bed with a naked man and a naked woman on top straddling that man. This is one that I've talked about in other contexts as well. It is a series of naked people. You have naked babies and children standing alongside adult naked people. You've got skinny naked people, you've got fat naked people, you've got black naked people, you've got brown skin naked people, and it is really staggering. There is absolutely no reason for this. If I walked onto a school recess at one of the Idaho schools and handed something like that out, drawings of adult naked people and kids, I'd be immediately hauled off to prison. And parents have no idea about this. It's so gratuitous.
Exactly, and therein lies the problem. This book can be in the libraries. Right now, we're trying to find out how many libraries this book is in. It's certainly in the public libraries, and heaven forbid that we should talk about removing this book because there's going to be an outcry, and it's just silly. It's obscene, it's pornography, and it needs to go. And this, we're sexualizing our kids. Again, I know you know this. We are sexualizing our kids, and we're doing the exact things to their brains that we're worried that our electronic devices are doing. We're doing worse with what we're teaching them through this kind of graphic material.
How about this letter we had from the Bonneville School District in Idaho? You actually had a letter that went home. The responsible party at the school district, is Kathleen Hansen, a master's in education for Bonneville School District. She sent a letter home, and entitled, the letter says, enclosed, you will find, to a mom, enclosed, you will find the permission form for the touch self protocol and pictures that will be used to teach your son to discriminate the appropriate place to engage in the behavior of masturbation. So brought into the school districts was a protocol to teach kids how and when and why to touch themselves, including graphic images. It is a man laying on a bed, grasping his penis in the prospect of masturbating with a little clip on masturbation. Now, this is absolutely staggering. I can imagine how shocking this is. This is nothing more than advocacy for sexual practices. This is not informational. This is radical left-wing advocacy, including graphic images given to children to encourage them to masturbate. But part of this you mentioned this reducing the risk curriculum, right? And you guys, a bunch of people in Idaho working together, you wrote up this assessment of this, right? The following are quotes pulled from the teacher's manual and the student workbook of the Reducing the Risk curriculum. This was brought to Idaho through the Department of Health and Wellness and is being taught at various high schools and even some middle schools. And I love the note. Please note, reducing the risk is said to be an abstinence-based curriculum, but their definition of abstinence is the following. Abstinence means choosing not to do any sexual activity that carries a risk for pregnancy or STD, HIV. So in other words, they define abstinence very misleadingly. If you happen to pick this up and see that it's an abstinence curriculum, it is an abstinence curriculum only in the sense that all sexuality, including oral sex and anal sex, these are perfectly fine as long as pregnancy or contraceptives are used to block disease. Is that fair to say?
Not only is that fair to say, but I found out by reading through this program that unbeknownst to me, they claim there are only 2 ways that a person can keep from getting pregnant. I thought there was only one way, but the second way is by practicing consistent, safe sex using contraception. And the whole program speaks of false information.
Yeah, and again, if a mom and dad were to see aspects of that and they see it called an abstinence program, I doubt many moms and dads are going to read further. This in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, we had an abstinence-only education program where the purpose was to teach kids the biology of sex, birds and bees, sperm and egg, things they needed to know on a biological level. And it was done for a couple of weeks in a health class. In order to teach this kind of stuff to Idaho kids and to America's kids, this, as you said, this is a daily, day in and day out thing. This becomes part of English class, it becomes part of sociology class, it becomes part of science class. They have to get this level of sexuality taught to the kids. This is taking over the curriculum. They're using school time when kids could be learning how to read or write better, when kids are learning actual science or actual math, to do this kind of garbage.
And therein lies the key point, that we are sexualizing our kids. We're spending an inordinate amount of time on this sort of activity when we could be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. Without a doubt, we are shifting our values. And I don't believe that they're Idaho values. I believe they're the values of those powers that be that are perpetrating this on our kids.
Yeah, this is progressive educrats, and they don't want you to know. They no longer care what you think of this. They're not terribly interested in your opinion, Mom. They're going to do this. If they have to, they'll send a consent form home, but they're not going to if they don't have to. And if they can bring in outside entities where they never have to tell you, they're not responsible in their minds. How about this one quote, to give you one example of a quote from this Reducing the Risk curriculum that undermines parents. Quote, "You do not need a parent's permission to get birth control at a clinic. No one needs to know when you are going to a clinic." So in other words, if you go to a Planned Parenthood, for instance, which is behind all of this, if you go to a Planned Parenthood clinic, you don't have to tell your mom and dad. And in fact, mom and dad have no right to know what Planned Parenthood is giving you, what kind of things they're providing for you, what services they may be administering to you. It really is pretty shocking. One more, quote, "In almost every state," the Reducing the Risk curriculum says, quote, "In almost every state, teens can be tested for HIV without parent permission. However, to be sure, teens should check with the test site beforehand to find out what policies are followed." So if you're a teen who thinks you might have contracted HIV, they're telling you, make sure you go to a clinic that won't tell them. Talk about underwriting parents' rights.
But the other thing that this does is part of this activity, they require the students in the class to go out and to find these clinics. And they have to go find these, well, what clinics are they referencing? Well, these clinics most often are going to be Planned Parenthood clinics. And so when they go to the clinics and now they meet with them and, okay, this is what happens. And if I have to check on this, well, now these clinics are setting themselves up for when the child actually does become pregnant because of all this essentially suggested sexual activity. When they become pregnant, where are they going to go? They're not going to their parents. Where are they going to go? They are going to go to these clinics, And these clinics are setting themselves up in a self-perpetuating way for the child to come back, and this is where they're going to receive their abortion, or rather their suggested care will come from here, and where they're going to receive their advice.
Yeah, they're just selling sexuality to kids, and they're profiteering from this, right? I mean, the more you can keep the parents out of it, the more you're going to commit to these private clinics. And I guarantee you, if an underage kid, an underage young girl goes to one of these clinics, the taxpayers are going to pay for that. Mom and dad are never going to know. School's not going to pay for it. The taxpayers are going to pay for that. And boy, talk about turning the kid's mind away from the parents and actually deceiving the parents in the name of big state protectionism. Before I let you go, there is some hope. I know you, the good people of Idaho, are on this. Dorothy Moon, who's worked with you on this, another great legislator from Idaho. You guys are doing a fantastic job. Already on the books in Idaho, however, is an educational and parental rights bill, right? You already have this. And according to this bill, they have no legal way to be doing this stuff, right? One of the things this bill says at the very top, this is Title 32 of Domestic Relations, quote, the interests and role of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children are both implicit in the concept of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in our nation's history. Parental rights. They are also among the unalienable rights retained by the people under the 9th Amendment to the United States, number one. Number two, the bill already on the books in Idaho says the interest of parents includes the high duty and right to nurture and direct their children's destiny, including their upbringing and education. And finally, this is from the document that's already enshrined as law. The state of Idaho has independent authority to protect its parents' fundamental right to nurture and direct their children's destiny, upbringing, and education. Your whole state constitution guarantees the rights of parents to be the parents. And as you just pointed out, your health and welfare department is completely undercutting the state of Idaho, undercutting moms and dads, undercutting the education, the duly elected education committee, who should have the right and responsibility to tweak any of this if it needs to be tweeted.
As a matter of fact, as we go through all of this, it frustrates me that we have to continue to codify the rights that are already explicitly granted already in other parts of our state statutes. But that parental right was put in just a couple years ago. And so what's happening is goes completely against all state statutes and all level of reasoning. But with all of this in mind, Duke, we are bringing, I am sponsoring another bill, and it would be an opt-in as opposed to an opt-out, trying to very explicitly state that anything of sexual content needs to have parental permission, because it's funny how with those opt-outs, those forms kind of get lost or forgotten, or the kids forget to bring them home. And, you know, in this case, we hope to prevent that from happening moving forward.
Barbara Ehart, please keep us posted on where this goes. This is a really big deal, and it's been exposed by lawmakers. I think that there are going to be a lot of moms and dads in other states watching this and just like, whoa, now we're going to get them to think, what is it we're not learning? Maybe this will provoke conversations between moms and children to find out what's going on in the classroom. You keep doing your good work out there, and when you get your bill ready to roll, or when it's time to put that up for a vote, please contact us. We'll get it back on the airwaves and try to get you some out-of-state support for these really good common sense moves. Thank you very much for your time today.
All right, Duke. So the final story is about Duke, but not you, Duke University. What's happening over there?
Duke University is in the news almost as much as the University of Wisconsin-Madison. From the school who brings you the Duke lacrosse rape hoax, the template for all this Title IX garbage that's taking place today, all of this, let's ignore boys' rights. We now have this interesting story, and it's not, on its surface, a huge story. We have Duke University, who has changed its form. They had a short-term illness notification form, right? STINF, as they called it, which allowed kids who were going to be sick, or kids who had injured themselves, or a funeral, to contact the administration through this form, go to the dean's office, and then the dean's office would then allow the teachers to know that, oh, hey, this student's going to be out today for this. Please take it into account. And this is a pretty typical thing at the university. Well, it's interesting. An interesting move. They've replaced the short-term illness notification form, has been superseded by the incapacitation form, and a new policy. And one of the most interesting aspects of this, it now allows students to decide whether or not they're going to tell us what their ailment is. As a teaching university professor, you are now telling kids that they can write to the dean of students and say to, not to me, the professor, the one who has to deal with them, but write to the dean of students and say, hey, I'm not going to be in class for the next 3 days, and I'm not telling you why. Your job is to write me, the professor, and say, John Smith has decided he's not attending classes for 3 days, and we're not gonna tell you. These kids are already finding every lame excuse. I swear to God, if you stacked up on a pile all the dead grandmothers I get every semester from these kids, kids, by the way, who have taken me 3 and 4 times, who must have had at least 6 dead grandmothers between the 6 classes they've taken with me. You stack them up in a row, I mean, it would be like the Terminal Tower in Cleveland, Ohio. It would be almost that big. So you're telling these kids now, in the name of what? All these goofy social justice, we can't ask these kids to divulge why they're absent. Sometimes it's a personal reason. So you are absolutely letting the inmates run the asylum here. You're not allowed to, and I wouldn't be allowed to ask those kids. So I hear a kid's going to be out for, and the university's got the good sense to say, after 3 days of this, then they're going to freeze it. After they miss 3 of your classes, the first time they use the incapacity form, then they're going to freeze it. That's not abundantly clear if 3 months later they do it again and they get 3 more times. You miss 3 days of my class, you may as well drop the class. Too much. I don't allow any absences. And any absences that kids are going to get credit for me from, they have to demonstrate that they absent for a reason. Give me a signed form from the doctor's office or the pharmacy. Show me something that proves to me that you are on a university-sponsored band camp thing or something. Give me something or else. But no. Now the precious little angels can determine whether they're going to tell you or not. And I could just see what's going to happen. The week before finals, I'm going to get, the last 3 classes of the semester, I'm going to get half my class then, all of a sudden staggeringly incapacitated, and there's nothing I can do about this. This is a stupid concession to a bunch of stupid kids who are smart enough to realize these stupid kids. They're stupid in the sense that they would rather not be in class. These kids that are too smart to know better, they want to be able to have control over this. And again, you question me, and once this takes root, it won't just be 3 times. If I can't question you why you were absent for those 3 days, why am I allowed to question you the next 6? If you tell a dean of students that you are incapacitated because you were sexually assaulted, which is a horrible thing, and 3 days later you skip a 4th class, I'm not allowed to ask you. And if I do ask you, I could get in trouble. So once you set the precedent, they're going to have to decide always. And there's so many examples of this in the news with college campuses about how we're allowing very small mobs of kids decide what we're going to read and not. We're allowing very small groups of campus protesters to decide who's in and who's out of the canon. We're allowing a very small group of campus protesters to decide whether or not there should be final exams, or there should be more time for final exams, or should we allow people to sit for 4 hours for a 2 exam because they need extra, or what kind of psychologists we're going to bring in, and coloring books and puppies to make the final exam experience feel better. Why in the world have we decided at college campuses that the children are going to dictate to us every aspect of their education? When you allow that to happen, when you allow the kids to tell you what they're going to learn, they're not going to learn much of anything. And so what purpose is the university at all if they won't enforce a little discipline, won't enforce a little responsibility, won't enforce high academic standards for fear of won't make kids read good books, even if white men wrote them? If you're going to take that stack at a university, you're going to take that stance, then just give up. Then quit pretending to be an administration of a university altogether and make it a co-op for kids who pay you a lot of money to do whatever they want.
Well, these kids are going to be on their honor code. That's what that's what Duke has said they're going to do. It's an honor thing.
Don't you understand that honor is a made-up, socially constructed word? It means nothing. And don't you understand that codes are symbols of privilege, right? Because they have to be decoded. No. This is like Evergreen State University, man. Just show up on campus and attend a few classes. Some of the classes will be outdoors, man. We'll have doulas walking around the campus, educational doulas, whose job it is to make sure that you're not going to class is really psychically in with you. It's very zen, right? And you get, instead of getting grades, you get various things, right? You get a stalk of wheat or a joint, depending upon your attendance, right? You get and instead of a diploma, well, the diploma's on really good hemp that you can smoke when you're done with it. This kind of nonsense is destroying the universities altogether. Discipline, responsibility, academic standards, rigor, and just all around consciousness of what we're trying to accomplish universities, all that's been deemed now utterly subjective, and it's the students who are calling the shots, not the educators.
That they are. All right, make sure you head over to drdukeshow.com and listen to the podcast, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite platform, and then if you have a chance, maybe give us a 5-star review while you're there.
I like the way Tom Jones did it. If you like what we're doing up here on stage, send us your underwear. not unusual to be loved by anyone. Mana, mana, mana. And I have to end it with, what's new, pussycat? Whoa, whoa, whoa. And that does it for us this week on the Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you heard here, please give a shout out to Tom Jones. What a wonderful mat of chest hair that man had. Please share the podcast with your friends. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's a swooning Bobby Soxer named Katie, and we'll see you next time.